little aside here on a sort of project that took over for a bit. Yeah, I was quite head on in the deep end with the MRSGSs already, looking into various subtopics thereof. When once upon a time ago, I thought, why don't I have a little look-see back on that whole mathematics of musical rhythm thing, because I included in my thesis in my Bachelor of Arts in the mathematics of music, my first degree there in college. And so I did, and oh, next thing you know, it was it's another monograph. Let's just say that. If anything, it's quite a bit longer, or promising to be for sure. Already as mapped out by sort of table of contents of concepts to include and whatnot. So I kind of took over for a bit. At any rate, I thought I'd give an aside on that. Just something to give you a little something to go on if you're interested in the topic, as I certainly am. And what we're looking at right here is a book called The Geometry of Musical Rhythm: What Makes a Good Rhythm Good, and that's by Gottfried Tausend. Again, many pardons in advance if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. At any rate, it's a very excellent book, and what we're seeing here is it's a rather interesting sort of portrayal of rhythm, and you can imagine the clock ticking around here. This is what we call a necklace in mathematics, combinatorics. At any rate, in fact, when we look in there a little bit here, so one of the pages, sort of took this off a preview from online of what's in the book. Mine's all written in, so it'd be quite a mess to try to share that. So just looking at this instead, we can see also some polygonal graphs, or what he calls polygonal notations, of rhythms. So, you can see, in fact, his usage of that right here. And so we were looking at that as in regards to the sort of circle graphs or polygonal graphs of the Fibonacci sequence over a modulus, over various moduli. The program I wrote, my brother wrote for me in high school, back in the day. And anyways, so but for different purposes. But at any rate, it's a rather similar notation, really. It's actually exactly the same principle, connecting, consecutive, elements of a rhythm, one to the other, and you get these sort of polygons, or polygonal type graphs anyway. And so it's a nice way to portray rhythms. You got this sort of cyclic notion of periodic rhythms that repeat, which is a common sort of occurrence, of course, in music. Oftentimes, if not always, of course, but oftentimes we have rhythms repeating. So these repeating rhythmic structures are what we're seeing right there. Polygonal graphs thereof. At any rate, I definitely highly recommend this book. I believe it is written in a way that many of us can, whether you're into mathematics or not, can appreciate most of what he's writing in here without, breaking out too much of a sweat there. That said, it's also very thorough, very wide scope. He goes into all kinds of various rhythmic structures from across the world, and there's other branches of science that he includes that I'm not including in my own research, which is more singularly focused on the mathematics of rhythmic structures themselves. He's more interested in one of his goals anyway, major goals, is, as the title suggests, what exactly is it that makes a rhythm sound nice? And so he's looking into all kinds of, psychological aspects of these things. It's quite a gamut of fields that are included in this very wonderful book. And here's another book. It's a bit more on the technical side. I wouldn't say it's for everyone, but if you do have a bit more of a mathematical sort of inclination or background, definitely check it out. It's Rhythm and Transforms by William A. Sethars. Again, apologies for pronunciation issues there. But yeah, it's also a very interesting book on rhythm and mathematics thereof. Mathematics and Music. Now this is, by the way, just sort of a random selection, not entirely random, but somewhat, of some of the textbooks that I have incorporated into my own research into the mathematics of musical rhythm, some more, some less, but also a smattering, a little bit here, a taster of for books that you might want to look into if you are also interested in the more general, like in the case of this book, connections between mathematics and music. Also, this book does include some on rhythm as well, but also, of course, if you're interested in the more specific subject of the mathematics of rhythm. But yes, also a good book, a bit more of a wider scope than just on rhythm, but very interesting. Now, this one is by Emmanuel Amiot. I don't know if I said that right. It's there you go. We'll just go with that. It's Music through Fourier Space, as it says here clearly. Discrete Fourier Transform in Music Theory. Now, this one is very technical. As far as mathematics goes, it's not exactly at all written for the lay reader in mind. So, if you are, if you have a stronger mathematical background, particularly in this particular type of field, then definitely an interesting read. Not your light reading, to be sure. Even then, it's a bit more of a treatise on this topic. So very intriguing. A Generative Theory of Tonal Music by Fred Lerdahl and Ray Jackendoff. Okay, I'm not going to say it again. Yes. Anyways, it's an interesting book. It's a bit more, in some ways, to do with some linguistics, as it relates to music theory of rhythm. So not exactly the approach I'm taking as far as how I'm looking into the structures of rhythm, but an interesting book if you're interested in seeing different perspectives as they've been applied to various theories of rhythm. Now, the rhythmic structure of music by those guys down there. I should just stop trying to read the names. I could probably read these ones, but oh well. Anyways, you can see the authors on the bottom of the book there. And again, another sort of more linguistic approach on this one, and yet also with some more of the classic music theoretic approaches to so we might call it sort of temporal structures of compositions, form, and all that, as it relates to from the macro to the micro levels. Anyways, but also using a sort of linguistic sort of bent on this one. Now, as for composers who were also theorists, as is often the case with composers, Olivier Messiaen, one of my favorite composers, and I have quite a few, but at any rate, absolutely love his pieces for piano. And at any rate, this is a wonderful book written by the author shown at the bottom of the book there. And it goes into a bit of his theories on, various things, including that of rhythmic structures in music. So a very worthy read. Now, I have some books as PDFs, as digital copies and such, so I just thought I'd mention some other people you might want to follow on this topic or related topics. For example, Ioannis Xenakis, quite a interesting composer with many ideas on possible theoretical approaches to music. So perhaps he's most well known for his stochastic approach to music, random chants and such. But he actually had a rather interesting theory on the rhythms in music as well. And so, at any rate, if you're interested in that, I would definitely recommend checking that out. Yes. Henry Cowell, just sort of grab these from Wikipedia, obviously, here. So at any rate, feel free to look him up in other locations on the World Wide Web or in your whatever local libraries, what have you. At any rate, I love his piano music as well, the clusters and such. He also had his own point of view on sort of a theory of rhythm. So feel free to look into that if you want to follow this topic. Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, also an interesting composer, and also had his own take on rhythm in music. So, this is just a smattering of different composers who've theorized something about rhythmic structures in music. So it's not at all a comprehensive list, and there's not to mention all the articles that have been written in various journals, you name it. So and certainly a last but not least type thing here. It's not last actually, but The Mathematical Basis of the Arts by Joseph Schillinger. Pretty sure I'm saying that basically correctly. Well, anyways, probably I'm not, but oh well. Russian composer. He sort of came over to the U.S. And anyways, long story short and more to the point on this book, it's almost like a sort of, I want to say, kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls, of musical rhythm theory, as far as mathematics is concerned. Therein, this book was pieced together by his wife and a few of his students after he died, and so and they used some of the lessons he gave to his students as written, some of his notes on his theories, and sort of pieced it together for him after he died, and then it was published posthumously. And I gotta say, that makes it a fairly difficult read. And that's why I kind of compare it to the Dead Sea Scrolls, because it's not tattered and torn per se, but it's kind of here and there and everywhere. And sometimes you feel like you flipped over 2 pages at once. Like, wait, what just happened? And so it's not for the casual reader, but if you want a nice challenge, challenging read, and yet very intriguing as far as mathematical music theory goes on rhythm in particular, although he also includes visual arts in this book. At any rate, definitely an interesting read. Yes. Just a little background on Joseph Schillinger here. I don't know how many know this, but the Berklee School of Music on the East Coast was actually started to help spread his ideas on music theory initially, but then that sort of changed over time after his reputation kind of, suffered a bit. I want to say in part because of this book, but I'm not an expert in the history of Schillinger or anything, but I have read a bit on it, and so it seems that in part it was because of this sort of almost hard to read book type thing, and there's also a bit of grandiose verbiage in his books. Even the title here, is The Mathematical Basis of the Arts, kind of implies the only mathematical basis of all the arts, and so if or when you read it, there's other sort of, I don't want to say, I'll just stick with the grandiose adjective there, a bit pie in the sky sort of language usage. But you know what? His theories were actually very interesting, and I gotta say, not so far-fetched as they were deemed posthumously upon him. And fortunately, there have been some more recent, relatively speaking, PhD theses and such, which have recognized some of the sources of that defaming of Schillinger, and hopefully that will help resurrect his good name, because he was a very interesting composer, and I gotta say, a music theoretician as well. In fact, here we have Maury Yeston. The Stratification of Musical Rhythm is actually a book that uses somewhat at its foundations, really, some sort of basis of Schillinger's ideas on musical rhythm, even though it doesn't go nearly as much into some of the... Schillinger had some ideas on algebraic manipulations of rhythmic patterns to create new rhythmic patterns and variations, and very deep stuff. Yeston in this book uses just the very basic fundamental objects that Schillinger was working with for analysis purposes. And also, near the end of this book, includes almost an index, really, of various rhythmic patterns, very much like you would find in Schillinger's own book on the topic. So, rather interesting. And if you wanted to get more into the music theory side, this book by Harold Krebs, Fantasy Pieces, Metrical Dissonance in the Music of Robert Schumann. And I don't know who doesn't like Schumann, but his piano pieces, again, very nice, as well as various other compositions. But at any rate, this is something to do with the polymeter, and again, we find Schillinger's basic notions, kind of coming through in here, somewhat based more upon Yeston, based upon Schillinger type thing. So that said, the echo of Schillinger is not inaudible, shall we say. At any rate, a very nice read, just even for its own sake, and some rather interesting original ideas from Krebs here on applying similar notions to Schillinger in a somewhat different manner for music analysis purposes. And so, yeah, that's just a few books, composers that you might want to look into if you're interested in this topic. I most certainly am. And in fact, I am in the process of writing in LaTeX, to begin with on this one, a sort of monograph on the mathematics of musical rhythm, a sort of approach that I kind of worked out on my own, only to find so many other interesting theories that have this or that connection to what I'm doing, and anyways, working in some of their ideas into my own context, in the more more rigorously mathematical context, more almost purely abstract mathematical context within which I'm working. So at any rate, yes, definitely some very interesting material out there to be looked at, and I can't recommend highly enough looking into this topic. It's a very interesting topic, but of course I'm a bit biased, obviously. So anyways, this is something that sort of took over for a while, and MRSGSs were kind of set aside for a second, couple years, as even though I was already quite deeply into them and already writing them about them, this investigation into the mathematics of musical rhythm took over for quite some time. At any rate, I'm now working my way back to some MRSGSs, figuring on finishing that up, and then back into this theory of rhythm. I should mention before the end of this video that I'm not including the numerous books and articles, what have you, PhD theses, whatever else, that are, more mathematically inclined, not inclined, but focused, because again, my own investigation into the mathematics of musical rhythm is in fact very much based within the mathematical aspects of musical rhythm. So, be making various references to less mathematically oriented texts, such as some of the ones that we saw on the previous pictures here, as well as others. But the main angle of my own monograph on the mathematics of musical rhythm is in fact the mathematics of it. And so, at any rate, these are just a couple of examples here on my shelf. But yeah, there's many more of where this is coming from. And at any rate, so just an FYI on that, more about the actual mathematics of musical rhythm as far as my own research goes will be available upon the publication of the monograph.